The Pokémon TCG in the United States wasn't always in the hands of the Pokémon Company directly. Much like how DNA developed Pokémon Pocket, the Pokémon TCG was originally worked on by another company other than the Pokémon Company. From 1998 to 2003, Wizards of the Coast translated and distributed the Pokémon trading cards created by the Pokémon Company. This would mark a crucial turning point in the game, as following the little-known e-card format, the Pokémon TCG marked an extreme low point for many reasons, which we will address in a later video. If you like this content and want to see more of it, please do like and subscribe. New life was breathed into the fledgling Pokémon TCG as the extremely successful Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire were released in Japan on November 21st, 2002, and in North America, Europe, and Australia in the spring and summer of 2003. Following the release of Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire, the Pokémon trading card game released the first expansion of what would be known as the EX series, and is the first time ever players would see the titular Pokémon EX. Regarded by some veterans as perhaps the best format Pokémon TCG ever experienced, the Pokémon TCG would never be the same after Pokémon EX made their debut, as each set rotation would feature powerful boss Pokémon in the same vein as Pokémon EX. There were Pokémon Level X in Generation 4, Pokémon EX in Generation 5, which are different than Pokémon EX in Generation 3, Pokémon EX and Mega Pokémon EX in Generation 6, Pokémon GX in Generation 7, Pokémon V and VMAX in Generation 8, and then finally the return of Pokémon EX in Generation 9, and subsequently in Pokémon TCG Pocket. Regardless of what they are called, these special Pokémon are all generally stronger, tougher, and give out at least 2 prize cards when knocked out instead of the usual 1. However, while Pocket is returning to Pokémon EX, there are some differences in design philosophy between their debut in Ruby and Sapphire and their current appearance in Pokémon Pocket. Starting off with the variety available, in Pokémon TCG Pocket there are currently a total of 21 Pokémon EX cards, with 15 from Genetic Apex, the singular Lapras EX promo card, and 5 from the Mythical Island booster set. As such, nearly every type is represented except Metal, Darkness, and Dragon. This is contrasted with the amount of Pokémon EX released in Ruby and Sapphire. In Ruby and Sapphire, 8 Pokémon EX were released with 1 for each type at the time, except Metal. They were Chansey EX, Electabuzz EX, Hitmonchan EX, Scyther EX, Lapras EX, Magmar EX, Mewtwo EX, and Sneasel EX. In Pocket, EX Pokemon typically make up the cornerstone of many meta decks, with a few exceptions. For example, Pikachu EX, Charizard EX, and Mewtwo EX form the cornerstone of the early Genetic Apex meta, with Mewtwo EX generally regarded as the strongest of the 3 right out the gate. However, raw power aside, in Pocket, Pokemon EX can also function as key consistency pieces that allow decks to function. Cards like Moltres EX make Charizard EX functional due to the large amount of fire energy required to keep it going, as its Crimson Storm requires not only 4 energy to attack, but also discards 2 each turn. Without Moltres EX providing up to 3 energy each turn to the Charizard line as it sets up, it would be impossible for it to maintain board presence in the face of the rest of the meta. Overall, the general design philosophy of Pokemon EX is simple. Consolidate deck building. Pokemon EX and Pocket create themes by which players, especially new ones, can build a strategy around them. For example, Pikachu EX is able to output a significant amount of damage starting turn 4 if the player has 3 electric types on their bench. This communicates to new players that Pikachu EX is a swarm deck, and to insert as many basic Pokemon as possible, and to make it a pure electric deck to increase damage consistency. Because so much of the Pikachu EX deck design has its power budget concentrated in the titular card, it is easy and accessible for new players to have access to a strong meta deck without having to work through several hours of theory crafting. This is generally not the case in the debut of Pokemon EX in Ruby and Sapphire. Concerning the design philosophy of Pokemon EX's debut in Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, they all had 3 core concepts in common. Number 1, was these 8 Pokemon were all retrains of powerful Pokemon from previous sets. Chansey EX, Electabuzz EX, and Hitmonchan EX were all callbacks to the same Pokemon as they existed in base set, just with EX era tweaks to their moves. For instance, Hitmonchan EX was an adjusted version of the original Hitmonchan, as its Steady Punch was a less consistent version of Jab from the base set for the same cost. Yet the Sky Uppercut from Hitmonchan EX was a stronger version of Special Punch, dealing 10 more damage for the same energy cost. One big difference though was the format. Without powerful energy removal cards, Hitmonchan's resistance to disruption was less useful, and thus it saw little to no play in Ruby and Sapphire. However, these retrains spanned more than just the base set. Scyther EX was a retrain of Scyther from Jungle, as were Lapras and Magmar EX being retrains of their previous fossil versions. Mewtwo EX was also a retrain of the dominant Mewtwo promo card, and similarly, Sneasel was a retrain of itself from Neo Genesis. The second core factor is that all of these Pokemon are non-evolving basic Pokemon, which also simplifies access. And the third factor, and perhaps the most important one, is that none of these Pokemon centralize strategies around them, with the possible exception of Mewtwo EX, simply because it is just a very strong individual card. That last component is what most differentiates Pocket's Pokemon EX from their debut in Ruby and Sapphire. Pokemon EX in their debut generation were intended to serve as powerful and limited tech cards for decks, rather than core deck-defining elements. In Ruby and Sapphire, those core deck-defining elements were to be consistency pieces, like the rare Hollow Swampert, Blaziken, and Gardevoir, who, coincidentally, has nearly the same ability as her Pocket counterpart. Just in Pocket, she has the Yu Nishida's Sun and Moon promo art. One core part of card design that highlights this difference is the HP pools of Pokemon in both formats. Ruby and Sapphire Pokemon EX generally don't have larger HP pools than their non-EX counterparts, like Pokemon EX do in Pocket. Sure, for a basic Pokemon they are stronger, but they don't set the ceiling for the overall set. Using the largest Pokemon as an example, Chansey EX has the same 120 HP as the regular Wailord. Lapras EX's 110 HP is the same as Aggron, and so forth. In Pocket, having a large pool of HP, in addition to special attacks, serves to cement Pokemon EX as the big components of each deck, with certain attacks being strong or weak depending on whether or not they can meet important breakpoints dictated by such HP pools. For example, Mewtwo EX was so strong in the early genetic Apex meta because it could KO nearly every opposing meta-relevant Pokemon in one hit, as opposed to a Pokemon like Pikachu, which nearly always required 2. In Ruby and Sapphire, the main focus in deck building was on consistency, which is why Pokemon EX weren't the cornerstone of the meta. Instead, the strongest combo was the supporter card Oracle from Skyridge and Delcatty from Ruby and Sapphire. This would slot extremely well into Blaziken decks, as the combo generally would be to use Oracle to stack your deck with the 2 best cards in it, then use Delcatty's Energy Draw to discard a Fire Energy and guarantee draw those 2 cards along with a random third one. Then use Blaziken's Firestarter to attach that discarded energy to any benched Pokemon. Essentially, this combo would search for any 2 cards with no strings attached, draw an extra card, and attach a free energy on your turn for the price of 1 supporter card, and you can still attack that turn. Simply put, there was no Pokemon EX that could match the utility of Delcatty or Blaziken, because while that consistency combo was extremely strong, they could also function quite well on their own and dish out intense amount of damage each turn. While Hitmonchan was format defining its base set, in Ruby and Sapphire, Hitmonchan's EX's 10 damage turn 1 wasn't enough to break out in such a fast-paced format.
Well, at the start of Ruby and Sapphire, there was a clear design philosophy surrounding Pokemon EX's strong cards that can augment strategies instead of centralized gameplay. This would change with the introduction of future sets in the EX era.
As the format continued to develop into the next year of sets, including Dragon and Sandstorm, Team Magma vs. Team Aqua, and Hidden Legends, additional Pokemon EX would be introduced to the format and would move much closer to Pokemon Pocket's design philosophy of Pokemon EX as a centralization tool. Starting just in the next 2 sets that were released both on September 18th, 2003 in the US, Dragon and Sandstorm, the Pokemon TCG would already experience a massive shift towards Pokemon EX being deck centralization cards. Perhaps the best example of this shift is the Gardevoir EX deck that won the 2004 Masters Division in the US National Championships. This deck's main strategy is reminiscent of the next Destiny's Mewtwo EX card that won Worlds 2012 and dominated that format. Gardevoir EX's main attack would do 10 damage per energy, which was a fantastic payoff for consistency pieces such as the aforementioned regular Gardevoir and Delcatty from Ruby and Sapphire, and the new Magneton from Dragon, which allowed the player to recur discarded energy. Much like the Pokémon Pocket Mewtwo EX deck today, this deck revolved around getting Gardevoir EX out and then having support Pokemon use their abilities to stack energies both in the player's hand and on the field to allow for the boss Pokemon to dish out serious damage. Overall, while Ruby and Sapphire were the genesis of Pokemon EX, Dragon and Sandstorm would immediately shift the design philosophy from one-off tech cards to format-defining cards. And that is how Pokemon EX, perhaps one of the most controversial aspects of the Pokemon TCG Pocket, got its start over 20 years ago. Please like and subscribe if you would like to see more content like this, and comment down below if you missed anything in highlighting the early EX format, or in the design of Pokemon EX and Pokemon TCG Pocket. If you are interested in more Pokemon TCG content, please check out our series on the history of the Pokemon TCG, or our previous video covering how the game has changed from base set in 1996 to Pokemon Pocket's release in late 2024.